Edgar Cayce revealed the spiritual power of fasting for the soul. What if the greatest spiritual feast begins with emptying yourself completely? Pause for a moment. Consider this paradox that has mystified seekers for millennia. In every spiritual tradition, from the Desert Fathers to the Buddha under the Bodhi tree, there exists this sacred contradiction. To receive everything, you must first release everything. Today, we journey into one of Edgar Cayce's most profound yet overlooked teachings. The sleeping prophet, as he came to be known, accessed universal records in states of deep trance. And among all his revelations about healing, past lives, and spiritual awakening, there was one practice he returned to again and again: fasting, but not the kind of fasting you might think. This wasn't about discipline, it wasn't about punishment or proving your spiritual worth. In Cayce's vision, fasting was something far more mysterious. It was your soul's ancient technology for divine communion. Picture this. What if denying your body could unlock doors your mind cannot even perceive? What if temporary hunger could awaken permanent spiritual sight? What if the very thing that feels like loss could become your greatest discovery? The mystics knew something we've forgotten. They understood that sacred hunger isn't about what you lack. It's about what you're making space to receive. By the end of our time together, you'll understand fasting not as sacrifice, but as invitation. Not as emptiness, but as the most profound fullness your soul has ever known. This is the story of how your hunger becomes holy, how your emptiness becomes prayer, how your soul remembers what it came here to discover. Are you ready to step into this sacred mystery? Edgar Cayce lived between two worlds. In his waking hours, he was an ordinary man, a photographer from Kentucky, a Sunday school teacher who read his Bible every year without fail. Nothing about his daily life suggested the extraordinary gift that lay dormant within him. But when Cayce entered trance, something miraculous occurred. His consciousness would slip away from the familiar shores of ordinary reality and drift into vast cosmic seas. In this state, he could access what he called the universal records, the Akashic library, the soul's own memory of truth. For over 40 years, Cayce gave readings while in deep sleep. People would come to him with questions about healing, relationships, purpose, past lives. And in that mysterious space between waking and sleeping, answers would flow through him like water through a clear vessel. Among all his teachings about the soul's journey, one theme emerged with quiet consistency: fasting. But Cayce's understanding of fasting was revolutionary for his time, and perhaps it still is for ours. He spoke of fasting not as religious obligation, but as spiritual technology, not as denial of the body, but as awakening of the soul. In reading after reading, he revealed fasting as a way to fine-tune your spiritual receiver, to clear the static between you and divine guidance. For Cayce, fasting wasn't about becoming worthy of God's attention. You already had that. It was about creating sacred space for your soul to remember its true nature, to recall what it knew before it took on flesh and bone and the beautiful burden of human experience. The sleeping prophet understood something profound. Your soul has its own hunger, a hunger that food cannot satisfy, a longing that only emptiness can fill. Close your eyes for a moment and feel into your body. Notice the sensations, the subtle rhythms, the quiet conversation between breath and heartbeat, between fullness and emptiness that plays out moment by moment within you. Now imagine this. What if your body is not separate from your soul, but rather its most intimate teacher? In Cayce's understanding, fasting represented a profound frequency adjustment, like tuning a radio to receive a clearer signal. When you temporarily step away from the constant cycle of consumption and digestion, something extraordinary happens. The background noise of physical maintenance begins to quiet, and in that silence, other voices can finally be heard. This isn't about rejecting the body or seeing it as enemy. That understanding misses the point entirely. Your body is sacred. It's the temple your soul chose for this particular journey. But sometimes even temples need to be cleared, emptied, prepared for something holy to enter. Cayce revealed what he called the divine sequence, how temporary emptying creates permanent fullness, how saying no to one kind of nourishment opens you to receive another kind entirely, a kind that doesn't come from outside you but awakens from within. Think about this. Every great spiritual breakthrough in history happened when someone was willing to let go of the familiar, to fast from what they knew, in order to discover what they didn't know they didn't know. The stakes here aren't about weight loss or health trends, though those may come as gifts along the way. This is about awakening dormant spiritual senses that connect you to infinite wisdom, about remembering that you are more than flesh and blood and the endless cycle of desire and satisfaction. You are a soul having a human experience, and your soul has its own way of seeing, its own way of knowing, its own way of being nourished. The question becomes, are you willing to get quiet enough to remember? The beginning of any sacred fast feels like standing at the edge of known territory. Your body registers the change immediately. It sends signals of alarm. Where is breakfast? Why are you disrupting the familiar rhythm? The mind joins the chorus of resistance. This is uncomfortable. This is unnecessary. This is too hard. But beneath the noise of complaint, something ancient begins to stir. Cayce understood that crossing into fasting consciousness requires crossing a threshold. You're leaving the realm of the purely physical and entering holy territory, territory your soul recognizes even if your mind doesn't remember the map. In those first hours, as the body adjusts to this new rhythm, you begin to notice something. The hunger you feel isn't just physical, it's deeper than that. It's the soul's own recognition of its eternal longing, its constant prayer for connection with something greater than the small self's endless needs. This is the first gift of the fast, awareness. Suddenly, you can see how much of your daily consciousness is occupied with thinking about food, planning it, consuming it, digesting it, wanting more of it. And in stepping away from this cycle, even temporarily, space opens up. Space for what? For prayer without words, for listening without trying to figure out what you're supposed to hear, for being present in a way that the constantly fed mind rarely allows. As the hours pass, something beautiful begins to happen. The hunger transforms. What started as physical craving becomes spiritual invitation. What felt like emptiness begins to feel like possibility. Your soul has been waiting for this moment, this pause, this sacred interruption of the ordinary that allows the extraordinary to emerge. But this is only the beginning of what your soul remembers. 3 days into a Cayce-inspired fast, something profound occurs. The practice becomes a mirror, not a harsh mirror that judges or condemns, but a loving mirror that simply shows you what is, shows you the difference between what truly nourishes you and what merely fills the space where nourishment should be. In his readings, Cayce spoke of how fasting reveals our attachments with crystal clarity, not just attachment to food, but to comfort, to distraction, to the countless ways we unconsciously medicate ourselves against the raw beauty of being fully alive. You begin to see the patterns, how you reach for something to eat, not because your body needs fuel, but because you're bored, or anxious, or celebrating, or grieving, or simply because it's time to eat, whether you're hungry or not. There's no shame in this recognition. Cayce understood that awareness without self-judgment is the doorway to transformation. You're not discovering that you're broken. You're discovering that you're human, and that your humanity includes both the unconscious patterns and the conscious choice to evolve beyond them. As the body begins its natural detoxification process, something parallel happens on the level of soul. Old emotional patterns, ancient fears, karmic debris that has been stored in the cellular memory begins to surface and release. You might find yourself crying for no apparent reason, or feeling inexplicably angry, or having vivid dreams that seem to come from lifetimes you've never lived. This isn't malfunction, it's healing, the soul using the fast as an opportunity to clear what no longer serves. Cayce taught that we are not just physical bodies trying to have spiritual experiences. We are spiritual beings temporarily clothed in physical form, and sometimes that clothing needs to be cleaned, emptied of everything that isn't essential, everything that isn't love. As the physical fog begins to clear, something extraordinary begins to emerge. By the second week of sustained fasting practice, something remarkable begins to unfold. The world becomes more. Colors seem brighter. Sounds carry deeper meaning. The ordinary world reveals layers of beauty that were always there, waiting to be noticed. But it's more than enhanced perception. It's enhanced reception. Cayce described this phenomenon with wonder. He spoke of how the soul, no longer weighted down by constant digestion, begins to hear divine guidance more clearly. Like clearing static from a radio signal, fasting allows the soul's natural sensitivity to divine frequency to emerge. Dreams become vivid teachers, not just random neural firing, but coherent messages from higher consciousness. You begin to wake with insights that feel like gifts. Understanding about relationships, about your life purpose, about challenges you've been facing, arrives not through thinking, but through knowing. Intuition sharpens. That quiet voice that speaks beneath the mental chatter grows stronger, more reliable. You find yourself knowing things you have no logical reason to know, understanding people's needs before they express them, sensing the perfect timing for important decisions. Synchronicities multiply. The universe seems to be speaking to you through signs and symbols, through meaningful coincidences that feel too perfect to be random. License plates, overheard conversations, books that fall open to exactly the right page. Everything becomes a potential message from your higher self. This isn't imagination. It's not spiritual bypassing or wishful thinking. It's your soul remembering its natural state of communion with infinite intelligence. The constant stream of food and the energy required to process it creates a kind of spiritual static. When that static clears, your soul's natural frequency emerges. You begin to understand what the mystics knew. You are not separate from the divine intelligence that orchestrates all life. You are an expression of it, and fasting is simply a way of removing the barriers between you and that recognition. But these outer signs of heightened sensitivity are merely pointing to an even deeper transformation. There comes a moment in deep fasting practice when something extraordinary occurs. The boundary between your personal consciousness and universal consciousness begins to dissolve. Cayce called this accessing the Akashic Records, the cosmic library where every soul's journey is recorded. But it's not something external that you visit. It's something within you that awakens. The realization that you have always been both the reader and the book, the seeker and the sought, the question and the answer. In the profound emptiness of sustained fasting, memory begins to return. Not just memory of this lifetime, but soul-level memory that spans across incarnations. Patterns become visible. Relationships that seemed random reveal their deeper purpose. Challenges that felt like punishment show themselves as precisely chosen curriculum for your soul's education. You begin to understand why you chose this life, why you chose these particular parents, these specific lessons, these relationships that have shaped and challenged and loved you. Not because you were assigned them by some external authority, but because your soul, in its infinite wisdom, knew exactly what it needed to learn and how it wanted to serve. This recognition comes not as overwhelming download, but as gentle remembering, like waking from a dream and slowly recalling who you really are. The temporary identity, your name, your role, your story, doesn't disappear, but it's seen in context. You understand that you are playing a part in a much larger drama, a cosmic story of love learning to recognize itself in countless forms. The fasting state creates perfect conditions for this recognition because it strips away all the layers of identification with the temporary. When you're not constantly processing food, when physical comfort and discomfort fade into background, what remains is essence. What remains is the eternal self that has never been born and will never die. You realize that every soul you've ever loved, you've loved across lifetimes. Every challenge you've faced by choice. Every gift you possess, you've earned through countless experiences of learning to love more fully. This isn't about believing in reincarnation or accepting any particular doctrine. It's about direct experience of your soul's continuity, the recognition that you are far more ancient, far more wise, far more connected than the small self ever imagined. In the clarity that emerges from extended fasting practice, the web of your soul's journey becomes visible. What seemed like random events, disconnected experiences, begin to weave together into a tapestry of perfect meaning. You see how every relationship was teaching you something about love. Every challenge was strengthening some quality your soul wanted to develop. Every loss was making space for something more authentic to emerge. Every joy was a reminder of your soul's natural state of celebration. Cayce taught that souls don't incarnate randomly. They choose their experiences with the precision of a master artist choosing colors for a painting. The soul knows what it needs to learn, what karma it wants to balance, what gifts it wants to develop and share. From the fasting state of expanded awareness, you begin to recognize your soul's divine assignment. Why did you choose this particular time in history to be alive? What unique combination of talents and challenges did you bring? What is your soul trying to accomplish through this human experience? These questions don't get answered through thinking. They get answered through being, through the profound stillness that fasting creates, through the space between thoughts where truth lives. You see how your greatest wounds became your deepest sources of compassion, how your most difficult relationships taught you the most about unconditional love, how your apparent failures redirected you toward your authentic path, how your struggles with addiction, depression, fear, or doubt were actually your soul's way of building the strength and understanding you would need to serve others facing similar challenges. The pattern that emerges is always the same. Every experience, no matter how painful at the time, was serving your soul's evolution toward greater love, wisdom, and service. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was meaningless. Even your mistakes were perfect stepping stones toward your highest potential. This recognition brings profound peace, not because life becomes easy, but because life becomes meaningful. You understand that you're not a victim of random circumstances, but a co-creator of your own soul's curriculum. Perhaps the most profound gift of sustained fasting practice is the clarity it brings to decision-making. When the fog of constant consumption clears, when the static of physical maintenance quiets, you can finally hear the voice of your authentic self. This voice doesn't shout. It doesn't argue or justify or defend. It simply knows. And in the spaciousness that fasting creates, you can finally hear what it knows. Cayce understood that fasting periods become cosmic consultation sessions with your higher self. The small self, the part of you that worries about fitting in, looking good, being comfortable, finally takes a back seat. And the wise self, the part of you that remembers your soul's purpose, is free to guide your choices. From this place of clarity, decisions become simpler, not easier necessarily, but clearer. You can see the difference between choices that serve your ego's desires and choices that serve your soul's evolution, between relationships that drain your energy and relationships that inspire your growth, between work that pays the bills and work that fulfills your purpose. The fasting consciousness reveals what Cayce called soul-aligned choice. Decisions made not from fear or obligation or social pressure, but from deep knowing of what serves your highest good and the highest good of all. This isn't about becoming perfect or never making mistakes. It's about developing the capacity to recognize when you're operating from love versus when you're operating from fear, when you're moving toward your authentic self versus when you're moving away from it. The power this brings is extraordinary, but so is the responsibility. When you can see clearly, you can no longer claim ignorance. When you can hear your soul's guidance, you're called to follow it, even when it leads you away from what feels safe or familiar. This is why fasting is ultimately an act of courage. It requires you to trust that your soul knows what it's doing, that the guidance emerging from the emptiness is more reliable than the guidance coming from the full mind's endless analysis and worry. Now comes the natural question: how does one actually engage in this sacred practice? How do you transform Cayce's mystical insights into lived experience? The sleeping prophet was remarkably practical in his guidance. He understood that spiritual practices must be grounded in wisdom about the physical body and adapted to individual circumstances. First, preparation. Cayce emphasized that sacred fasting begins before you stop eating. It begins with setting clear spiritual intention. This isn't about weight loss or proving your willpower. This is about creating sacred space for divine communication, about temporarily stepping away from the physical to remember the eternal. Begin with shorter periods, a single day, a morning, even skipping one meal while spending that time in prayer or meditation can begin to shift your consciousness. Cayce taught that the soul responds to sincere intention more than perfect execution. During the fast, engage in spiritual practices that support your intention. Read inspiring texts, spend time in nature, practice gentle movement like walking or stretching, journal about what arises, pay attention to dreams. Most importantly, listen. Create space for divine guidance to emerge. The breaking of the fast is as important as the fast itself. Return to eating slowly, mindfully, with gratitude. Let the experience of hunger deepen your appreciation for nourishment. Let the practice transform not just how you relate to food, but how you relate to all forms of receiving. Cayce was clear that fasting should enhance life, not diminish it. If you have health conditions, are pregnant, taking medications, or have a history with disordered eating, consult with healthcare practitioners who understand both physical and spiritual well-being. Remember, this is not about perfection. It's about connection, not about proving your spiritual worth, but about discovering your spiritual nature. Your soul doesn't need you to suffer. It needs you to remember. The goal is not to become someone who fasts perfectly, but to become someone who listens deeply to divine guidance, whether that guidance comes through fasting or through countless other forms of spiritual practice. Perhaps as you're considering this practice, you're hearing other voices, voices of concern from people who love you, family members who worry you're taking spirituality too far, friends who don't understand why anyone would choose to go without food, medical professionals who caution against any form of fasting. Take a moment to breathe into their concern. It comes from love. They want to protect you from what they perceive as harm. Their worry is a form of caring, even when it feels like criticism or resistance. The truth is, spiritual fasting can seem strange to those who haven't experienced it. We live in a culture that equates constant consumption with health and happiness. The idea of voluntary emptiness as spiritual practice goes against many deeply held beliefs about what it means to take care of yourself. How do you bridge this gap? How do you honor their love while following your soul's guidance? Start with honest communication. Share your intentions clearly. Explain that this isn't about deprivation or punishment, but about spiritual connection. Invite them to read about Edgar Cayce's approach. Show them that this practice has ancient roots and modern wisdom behind it. Most importantly, demonstrate through your actions that this practice enhances your well-being rather than diminishing it. Let them see you become more peaceful, more loving, more clear in your purpose. Let your life become the evidence that spiritual fasting serves your highest good. At the same time, stay open to their wisdom. If loved ones express genuine health concerns, listen. Spiritual practice should never override practical wisdom. Consult healthcare providers when appropriate. Modify your approach based on your individual circumstances. Remember that not everyone is called to this practice, and that's perfectly fine. There are countless ways to deepen spiritual connection. Fasting is one path among many. What matters is that you follow the guidance that emerges from your own deep listening while staying in loving relationship with those who care about your well-being. Transform potential conflict into opportunity for deeper understanding. Let their questions help you clarify your intentions. Let their love remind you to approach this practice with wisdom and care. Imagine yourself 1 year from now. You've been practicing sacred fasting with consistency and wisdom. What do you notice about yourself? What has shifted? The changes are subtle but profound. You find yourself more naturally attuned to your body's actual needs versus its unconscious cravings. You eat when you're hungry, stop when you're satisfied, and genuinely enjoy food without the underlying anxiety that used to accompany eating. Your relationship with all forms of consumption has evolved. You're more discerning about what you allow into your consciousness, what you read, watch, listen to, engage with. You've developed the capacity to fast from negativity, from drama, from anything that doesn't serve your highest good. Your intuition has become a trusted friend. That quiet voice that speaks beneath mental chatter has grown stronger through the regular practice of creating space to hear it. You make decisions with greater confidence because you've learned to distinguish between the ego's fears and the soul's knowing. Your compassion has deepened, especially for those who struggle with various forms of addiction or unconscious consumption. You understand from experience how challenging it can be to change patterns and how transformational it can be when someone finally creates space for their authentic self to emerge. Most beautifully, you've developed a profound appreciation for both emptiness and fullness. You can be present with hunger without anxiety, knowing it's temporary and often meaningful. And you can receive abundance with gratitude, knowing that everything you truly need is always provided. This isn't about becoming someone completely different. It's about becoming more fully yourself, the person you were always meant to be, beneath all the layers of unconscious patterns and social conditioning. You've learned that spiritual practice isn't about perfection. It's about presence, about showing up authentically to each moment, whether that moment includes eating or fasting, speaking or silence, doing or being. This is the future that awaits not as distant goal, but as natural flowering of consistent practice. The courage to create sacred space in your life opens you to receive guidance that transforms everything. As we near the end of our journey together, we arrive at Edgar Cayce's deepest teaching about spiritual fasting. The ultimate fast is not from food, but from separation. Everything we've explored, the hunger that becomes prayer, the emptiness that becomes invitation, the purification that becomes clarity, all of it points toward this final recognition. The deepest human hunger is for oneness, for connection, for love without conditions or barriers. In Cayce's understanding, we fast from the illusion that we are alone, from the belief that we are separate from each other, separate from nature, separate from the divine intelligence that breathes us into existence moment by moment. The physical practice of fasting becomes a metaphor for the spiritual practice of releasing everything that keeps love at arm's length. We fast from judgment, from the need to be right, from the insistence that others change before we can love them fully. We fast from the story that we are victims, that life is happening to us rather than through us, that our circumstances determine our peace. We fast from the exhausting effort to maintain an image, to prove our worth, to earn love rather than simply receiving it as our birthright. This is the feast that emerges from the ultimate fast, the recognition that you have never been separate from love. You are not someone who sometimes experiences love when conditions are right. You are love itself, temporarily forgetting its nature, gradually remembering its truth. Every moment of voluntary emptiness creates space for this remembering. Every time you choose spiritual hunger over spiritual numbness, you're saying yes to love's invitation to know itself more fully through your unique expression. The greatest fast becomes the greatest feast, not because you finally receive what you've been seeking, but because you realize you are what you've been seeking. You are the love you've been longing for. You are the connection you've been craving. You are the divine presence you've been trying to access. This recognition doesn't end your human experience or make your challenges disappear. It transforms them. Every difficulty becomes an opportunity to love more skillfully. Every relationship becomes a mirror showing you aspects of yourself you hadn't recognized. Every moment becomes a chance to choose love over fear, connection over separation, trust over control. Here we are at the end of our exploration and the beginning of yours. You came to this moment carrying questions about spiritual fasting, about Edgar Cayce's teachings, about the mysterious relationship between emptiness and fulfillment. You're leaving with something more precious than answers. You're leaving with an invitation to discover for yourself what the mystics have always known, that you are not just a physical body trying to have spiritual experiences. You are an eternal soul temporarily clothed in flesh, here to remember and share love in all its forms. The path of sacred fasting is not for everyone, and that's perfectly fine. There are countless ways to create sacred space for divine connection. What matters is that you find the practices that open your heart, clarify your purpose, and deepen your capacity to love. If this teaching resonates with you, if something within you recognizes the truth in these ancient understandings, then perhaps you're being called to explore this practice, not because you should, not because anyone expects it of you, but because your soul is ready for this particular form of remembering. Trust your inner guidance. Start small. Listen deeply. Seek wisdom from healthcare providers when appropriate. Find others who share this path for support and encouragement. And above all, approach this practice with love. Love for yourself, love for your body, love for your soul's unique journey. The paradox we began with now reveals its deeper truth. The greatest spiritual feast begins not with emptying yourself of everything, but with emptying yourself of everything that isn't love, everything that isn't truth, everything that isn't the recognition of your own divine nature. You are eternal. You have been seeking yourself across countless lifetimes in countless forms, and in this moment, in this very breath, you can choose to remember, choose to create sacred space, choose to fast from everything that keeps you from recognizing your own magnificent nature. The feast that never ends begins when you finally allow yourself to be truly empty, empty of everything that isn't love. Your soul's journey begins now. Your remembering begins now. Your return to wholeness begins now. The invitation is yours to accept. The feast is yours to receive. The love you've been seeking has been seeking you all along. Welcome home.